Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. I am Tim Anderson, aka Renfell, and tonight we're going to be talking about hardcore versus casual, or maybe just end game versus the rest of the game, and the debates on either side of it, and so on and so forth. But before we do that, let's talk about the two people who are here tonight with us. Go ahead and introduce yourself, guys.
Scribble. My real name's Jesse, and I am a developer on Defend the Night. It's a game MMORPG that trying to get back to the old school feel, similar to EverQuest. That's me, just here to talk about MMORPGs and development.
Yep, I'm AshenPhoenix. I do a podcast called Crash While Loading. It's on Twitch and on anywhere a free podcast is sold. And I basically just talk endlessly about everything: movies, TV, video games, MMOs, people
And
I
he does
like, people I
and he
don't
does
like.
comedy, lots of comedy too,
I I
comedy
have been told
skits
I can be funny. Haha.
Now this
for
is
you guys.
pod racing. I laugh every time I hear that because that's one of these
Yeah,
things I use
this is
that I
podcasting.
use that quote all the time. Like this is pod racing every time I do something stupid in a game. I
Yippee!
know you
Wizard!
just as
It's
I
hysterical.
actually like the prequels, but there are
I
moments from the prequels that make me cringe.
Pretty much anything with Mannequin Skywalker in it is pretty bad, yeah.
Yeah,
That poor kid
yeah, and his real life as an FYI,
went
as an
awful.
adult, yeah, he is. It's been addiction, rehab, bad,
Mhm.
bad, bad shit. Not a
Yeah.
good life for
No,
him,
he did not go well
unfortunately.
after that. It was all downhill after being 7.
Unfortunately, yeah. So it sucks for
Mm.
him. Um, what have you guys been up to? I know we were talking a little bit about Crowfall before the show, so why don't we dive into that a little bit?
I
Oh
got an
yeah.
hour, but Scribbles over
Oh yeah,
here.
I was up at launch 8 o'clock this morning, hitting it hard. Uh, I got my I think I'm 25, level 25 right now. So between the time it's been down, I think it's been down for me about 3 hours today. But other than that, the launch has been real smooth. They
It
just
has
launched
been.
today. They launched
Yeah.
today, first time. And I love launch days. For me, it's like almost kind of like a lesser Christmas day or whatever you celebrate, but birthday or something. But it's for me, it's that cool newness that you get from hopping into a game like this, vast MMORPG. Uh, I've been hearing, like, I tell people that it's out today, and I get a lot of flack, like people that have been in the game for a while, that have been testing it for a while, and I just don't see it. I think it's a great game so far. So, uh,
It played smoother than most of
yeah.
them do, especially on launch day.
Mhm.
You know, other
So
than a patch, which that's not bad. 3 hours down on launch day, most people would kill for that. World of
mhm,
Warcraft.
Even
mhm,
yeah, even like the progression servers that EverQuest 1 and EverQuest 2 do
Oh
not
yeah.
have smooth launches, and they've been doing them for like 8 years now.
Mhm.
So for somebody to be able to pull something off where there's only a few hours of downtime, that's not bad. I am
yep,
curious though because from what I understand, the level 1 to 30 is like an on the rails. You do it in a few hours. It's like 4 or 5 hours. Then you're max level, and then you get into the real game, which is the PvP. Correct?
I'm not there yet.
Okay.
I couldn't really
Yeah.
touch you on that, but I know right now it's a linear. It's a linear tutorial. Like, it tells you how to do like, it kind of guides you through the game, because there's a lot to it, and it kind of single passes you through the game of what, how to craft, and how your spells work and how to do combos. And so it's a linear path. It's kind of like a quick tutorial, but it's taken me all day to get 25. So, we minus that 3 hours.
Yeah, I've
So
heard it's
it's
largely PvP centric, but I
mhm,
I'm level 4.
yeah.
So you're
So I,
saying,
I guess
go ahead.
I guess there's realms. I guess there's realms that we you know PvP sieges, large PvP battles, but you're gonna have to skill up your. I guess it would be your keeps, to defend and to take over certain areas. But I'm not there yet, so I'm still getting in the game. I'm not one of those people that researched it a lot before I went
Yeah.
in. I just kind of I'm trying to pick it up as I go. I'm not too salty about anything that was in development or anything like that. I'm just
Mhm.
first person view. of what the game is. Right now, it's
Yeah.
good for me.
I kickstarted it back in 2016, and for $35, basically just until you said it today, I forgot.
Uh,
Other than a couple, like I get the email like, "Hey, Kickstarter, blah blah blah," and I didn't realize some of those emails were probably like, "And hey, dummy, you could be in the beta right now if you actually paid attention and read your emails instead of just like, oh yeah, click click click." And
yeah,
but no, it's pretty. I gotta say I was streaming. And some of the people that were watching me, they were surprised and happy with the. I mean, you can be the Minotaur. You got centaurs. They pick some character class or character players that I've
I
not
think
seen in other MMOs before.
I think yeah, the races are great. It's just I've never seen
Yeah,
those races, and it is very stylistic, the art style, but I think it's really good. It's really done well. So uh, and it's in Unity, so that's a good another game that's released in Unity. So that's one more in the belt for those guys
yeah.
over at Unity.
Why do you think?
So
Why do you think some people are complaining about it? Because I haven't read anything about it. I'm just curious because I'm not
so
interested in PvP. So
what is one guy said who said something along the lines of uh, I've been in it a long time, and there's just not a lot of meat to it. After you get
Hmm.
to certain levels, you level up, you get more gear, you level up, you get more gear. You have to craft items to get more gear. And that's what the game is. Craft, PvP, craft, PvP, craft. And I think that they want more dungeon crawly type game, but that's not what this
It's
game
not.
is.
yeah,
No,
it's
Yeah.
not.
So,
I crafted a pair of daggers from my cooking stove.
uh,
So that was in, my the cook pot that you first come up to. I'm like, oh look, you can make daggers out of it, and I just
yeah,
threw
yeah,
some wood and stone in there, boiled it for 10 minutes, and I got daggers. That's how
yeah.
that works.
This game
Yeah.
is open
Video
world.
games.
This game is open world, so you're not going to get led around
Mm-mm.
after you get that that first tutorial type quest 30. After that, that's it. You got to find your own stuff, and you have to get in a guild because you got to defend it. Or you're just going to get camped. It's a PvP game,
Yeah.
so that's a big thing. If you're expecting something else, um, it's not going to happen.
Read the description. Yeah.
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 PvP, large PvP siege battles. That's what this game is. Not dungeon crawling, uh, group style gameplay. So
Okay.
this is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as an FYI for those of you listening, because this is going to be airing a week after this point. We're recording this on July 6th, so this is the day that Crowfall came out because this will
Yeah.
be airing on the 12th, which is a few days from now. But
Mm.
in any
Yeah.
case, okay. So I wasn't even aware that it was out until I saw their social media today. And because I'm not a PvPer, I'm like, eh.
Mm.
I've been, I got into over this past holiday weekend on Friday. I was like, as much as I tried to like Dungeons and Dragons Dark Alliance, it
Yeah.
just I've done the first two uh, campaigns in full. So there's 6 acts in there, six
Yeah.
different acts. I've done those first two. I haven't touched the game in a week now because it's just honestly not that for me. It wasn't that good, but it got me back in a Forgotten Realms mood, and I own all of the old Black Owl games through GOG. And so I had already played Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 last year, last fall, prepping myself for the Baldur's Gate 3 early access. And I went ahead and was like, I'm going to install Icewind Dale Enhanced Edition. So that was Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, was, streaming those and
Yeah.
remembering what an awesome game, the music in particular in that game. But just that's such an iconic CRPG classic. So that's
Mm.
what I've been doing, and then I played some
Yeah.
more Mass Effect Andromeda today. But man,
Oh, did any of you guys try because it was the beta weekend for the Broken Ranks MMO, that one that
I
is
watched you
Diablo
play it.
style? Yeah. Did anyone get a chance to
I
do that
did
other than that?
not,
No.
but I did. I watched a couple hours. I don't know how long you streamed. I think because I was
Yeah, an hour or so.
in and out of the kitchen doing breakfast that morning. But I
Yeah.
feel like I caught a couple hours of your stream.
Yeah, that was interesting. I will say it definitely needs the icons are way too small.
Yeah.
It looks really good. It looks really well
But
done.
yeah, like Grand mentioned, the music is good, the visuals are great, the combat style. I think there's going to be a lot of depth to it. You just have to be able to
Strategy
see
wise,
it.
yeah. Yeah, you need to be able to
Yeah,
see it, and I wish they would give you more than 10 seconds
10 seconds is way too short.
yeah, because it's like you're just like you get the three different, you get your physical, your ranged, your mental, and then you've got your different
Hmm.
types of attacks, and you're like you have 10 seconds
You have
to
in 12
switch out
points to
attacks. Right.
delineate.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Switch attacks and change power.
Defend.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's just
and
not
then and
enough.
Yeah.
then as we found out, if you actually let it just count down to 0, it doesn't automatically attack with what you have set up. It just skips your turn. So you have to click the timer on top of that. So you have really less than 10 seconds because if you wait till that 1 second mark, you may or may not make it.
Yeah,
But
there's some quirks to it, but it did look
yeah,
visually it looks good.
visually, and I will say I read through, reading through someone. I know I was like speeding through on the thing because I wanted to see how it played, which it played very smoothly. Um, but the writing seems really good too. On the very first ship, you get a bowl from the cook and it's got maggots in it, and you go to look in the barrel, and apparently he put his wife's head
Head.
in there as storage because, I mean, what else would you do? Because he wanted to take her across the sea to have her buried properly because he didn't do it, somebody else did it supposedly, and then you have to help him hide the head somewhere else and get the key. It had. And then there was a story later on that I was playing through, just had like half an hour. I didn't stream it, but a girl was hearing ghost in the well, and it turns out it's her husband and some douchebag that was making him like in a dried up well, and they were wanting port, like a 500 gold thing, a barrel of ale, and you can. For an MMO, it had a weird, like, you had the option to tell him to stay away from her, she's a crazy bitch, or she really misses you and loves you, you should go back with her. And apparently, whatever you choose has actually affected them in a very kind of Mass Effect way, which is different for an MMO, I
Hmm.
thought. Yeah, it was very
It
interesting,
looks
but it's definitely one
intriguing.
to keep an eye on. Yeah, even though
Hmm.
I'm not a big fan of I don't like the isometric Diablo style over the top stuff.
Me
Really,
neither.
it's not my jam. I don't know why.
I do like those types of games for single players, but I do not like them for MMOs.
Like a RuneScape.
Yeah, my MMOs need to be first person or third person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't get it. There should be a can all this is a camera adjustment. All you gotta do is throw it over their shoulder, and
yeah,
then there you are.
yeah. Well, I think
tis
with
a
this one, it's because
style.
it looks all, it's kind of hand drawn in a way. Yeah, and I don't
Mhm.
know if it actually is or not, but it sure looks that way. They did a good
Uh,
job with it, but
yeah,
it's got. I mean, this was their first big beta
Probably.
weekend, and of course they got a DDoS attack because it's the internet in
people are like
2021 and
that.
people are
Yeah.
assholes. Yeah, but it's definitely one to keep an eye out for in the future, I think.
Yeah, they probably wrote their own shader and it made it look like the way it is. So
Yeah,
kudos to those art technicians, those technical
awesome.
artists.
Yeah,
All right. Well, since speaking of Crowfall and getting through the first tutorial and getting to the real game, which is the
the
end
end
game,
game.
um, tonight's topic is about, well, it's kind of multifold, but the original kind of idea for this episode was to talk about the ever-present argument of hardcore versus casual. But there's more to it than just the philosophies of those two sides of the fence. There's also the development of those two different types of content and whether or not it's good or bad, and the evolution that we've seen in the development of games since, say, the first iteration of like EverQuest to where we are today, where we see games like, for example, Star Wars: The Republic, which has a very different type of in-game design than EverQuest 1 did. Um, I do want to start with the argument perspective, and then we can dive into the development and content creation aspect of it. The one thing that's always fascinated me about the argument of, and it's almost always casuals and role players who make the argument that raiders are elitist assholes who ruin the game for them in some way or another. And I've never understood that because I have always melded roleplay with raiding very successfully. I ran a top 10 worldwide guild for 7 years, and we hosted some of the biggest roleplay events on EverQuest 2 and in Vanguard. A couple of times we got world firsts. We were top 3 on our server throughout those 7 years. So I was always very much into the roleplay environment, but also raiding. And I've always looked at that, and I've never understood the argument that you can't, like, people think that it's this mutually exclusive thing. Like you're either a hardcore raider or you're a casual, or you're a hardcore raider or you're a role player. And if you're a role player, you're automatically casual and all this other stuff.
And you can't PvP if you roleplay. That's impossible.
Yeah, it's I don't know. But the one thing that always made me laugh is the people who claim that raiders and hardcore guilds are assholes and elitists because they have a barrier of entry to get into the guild, whether it is a mandatory amount of hours per week played. That's
Hmm.
usually not so common. What is common is set raid days that you need to show up to participation levels in order to spend DKP or to get raid gear, and a certain level of gear requirements. And if there are alternate advancement points in the game or skill tiers, then you have to have your skills at a certain tier or your alternate advancement points at a certain level. Um, what a lot of people I think fail to realize is that, especially I always look back at EverQuest because that's when the argument I saw the argument first come into play was when you had guilds who started to say, okay, you need a minimum of 100 in all your resists, and you need a minimum
Hmm.
of 1,000 armor class. And this was Kunark era, if I remember correctly, Kunark or Velius. And that wasn't because the guilds were being elitist assholes. It was because you can't go fight dragons unless you have magical resists and a lot of really cool magic gear to give you the armor class, because otherwise those dragons are going to one shot you. So if you want to be able to do that type of content, there is a certain amount of hard work, dedication, and progression that is required to get to that point. And I've always likened it to the Olympic athlete. And I always use cyclists as an example because at that level, you've reached a certain tier where you're riding a bike that's worth thousands of dollars. You're wearing gear that is aerodynamically designed to help you maximize your speed. You've trained your ass off. You're probably taking the best vitamins and supplements that are available on the market. You may or may not be taking performance enhancing drugs, but you've done everything you've done everything you can to get to the top. And there is a difference between the person who's doing it at that level and the person who, say, goes to the park on a Saturday afternoon with their significant other and rides their bike around their little, $75 Huffy that they bought at Walmart and just tools around the park for 2 hours, has a picnic, and comes home. That person is enjoying the bicycle at a very casual level and only
Yeah.
does it on the weekends. And then the
Hmm.
Olympic guy does it for a living. Those are not necessarily mutually exclusive. It's just the amount of time someone is dedicating to that,
Mm.
and one does not affect the other. That's where I've always felt like, why do casuals care what raiders are doing? Because it doesn't impact their gameplay whatsoever. All right, discuss. Sorry, I ranted for a bit.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, that's a perfect analogy. It was just like I was just gonna say something like a marathon runner or someone playing golf. They spend more money and more time on what they're working with to get to that elitist level. That's a great analogy. I I do have issues though, blocking content. That happens a lot too. You'll have casual people that still raid. They might not be, um, the elitist type, but they are getting put in a position where they are bottlenecked out of content. And there's two kinds of ways some guilds do that to block off content from other people, and I do have issues with that. You should be again playing against the game and the functionality of the game, uh, or those mobs or bosses or dragons.
Is that
You
really
should
a
be able.
problem these days, though? And again, I guess the question would be, is that a problem these days in PvE games? I can understand that being a problem in PvP, but isn't that kind of the point of a PvP
Yeah.
game?
Um,
Well, I know in Final Fantasy 14, the system built into it with the item level almost it does it for them. Like if your they have an item level and it's gone higher and it's astronomical now with the current expansion. But a lot of these things you can't go into the raid unless you've already met that requirement. So it's not. The guild doesn't even have to do it. The game
That's
itself
I didn't
does
know
it
that.
now.
That's interesting.
Yeah, there's just like I just there's just certain item requirements. Yeah, 1 through 50, it's like it's level to level. But once you get after 50, the item levels are exponentially higher. Like I think the level 80 is a thing is the max in Final Fantasy 14 now, but the gear is at like 460, 470 something. It's in the 400s.
It's kind of like
So
power in Destiny 2, I guess. Then.
yeah, it's very similar. And to answer your question earlier, why role players look at raiders like that is and where the bicycle analogy somewhat falls apart, and this may not always be true, but it's the perception, and that's perception is reality. The difference is that the Olympic bicycler doesn't go over to the casual and jump up and down and squat in his face while he's in the middle of his park, trying to do his thing with his girlfriend at the park, which for role players happens a lot, and a lot of times they tend to be raiders when you're out in public role playing and then somebody starts popping off things, challenging everybody to duel and jumping up and down on top of you on the table and starts dancing and doing emotes.
What do they call that? They call that teabagging.
Well,
Is that what
Yeah,
they?
teabagging. Yeah.
it happens a lot, and a lot of times
Yeah.
the perception is that they're usually raiders. That's where at least it comes in. I actually have a friend that I used to do my show with, Strafe. Before he was a role player, he was a raiding troll on role players. He would go to them, he would harass them, he would, shoot off the spell effects and do. He was a dick, basically. And then he started like, wait a minute,
What are you guys doing?
that kind of looks like fun. Can I play? And he slowly converted. But that's the perception I think of why some role players really really look down on raiders like that. The other one for the casuals and role player, just casuals in generals, is one I'd mentioned to you beforehand. Is that the amount of resources that go towards development of those high level, high grade tiers of rating is disproportionate to the number of people that actually get to participate in versus the casuals and the role players. So there's always that disparity. Like role players, what do they want? They want more emotes. They want more housing. They want more housing items. They name it and they want it. Clothing. Well, although raiders do tend to love really cool clothing too. That is one thing on the Venn diagram raiders and role players have that overlap. They
They
want to look cool.
love looking good.
They
This is this is
yeah.
a funny story because in EverQuest 2, well, I guess before I get to that, I do want to touch on what Scribbles was saying a minute ago, the cock blocking basically. Um, I haven't really seen that, but I don't play PvP, so I'm speaking from a PvE perspective. I haven't really seen that since instancing got introduced into MMORPGs. It definitely used to be a thing like, say, EverQuest 1
EverQuest and even two had it,
to
especially at the
some degree.
beginning when it was hardcore.
Right, at the beginning before they started doing
Yeah.
the instanced persistent zones and everything. Because I can remember trying to get keyed for Vexthal for VT and EverQuest 1 and Velius, and we were not the first guild to get there. We were like the third guild, and there was a big battle between the first guild who got there, and they were basically just permacamping everything, and we literally, as much as we wanted to do the content, we weren't allowed to, because at that point the respect of, hey, we're all going to set a date on the calendar and everybody gets their fair take. The calendar had gone out the window and it was first come first serve, and we had to wait, like, I want to say like 8 months before we could even get into
Wow.
it because they just kept it permacamped. um, and eventually they just got bored and moved on to other stuff. But um, you're talking about the role play thing, and the looking cool and everything else. So obviously we know that these days, and Sony was the first company, as I recall, Sony was the first company to go the way of allowing the um, the real market transactions to become a part of their game. So they were one of the first. I remember, as I recall, they were the first company to do this. They had a server that, this is how it started. If you played on that server, you could buy and sell items on that server for real currency, and they had an online marketplace where people could post the
Yeah.
items, and you could do it that way. Now, of course, these days every game has a cash shop where you can buy and sell things, potions, cash, leveling items, cosmetic gear, and everything else. But I'm not ashamed to admit that I bought gold back in the day. EverQuest 1,
Mhm.
EverQuest 2, and I'll never forget because I was running at a character, Thanon Rockguard, who was the leader of this roleplay guild called the Bloodguard Mercenaries, and we at the time were the raid leading guild of this roleplay alliance of raiders, and we were the ones who were leading that alliance. And I was writing all these events for the servers and everything else, having a lot of fun. But um, I didn't want to spend weeks of my time grinding to get the platinum that was required to get the end game mounts. So I went out and spent like $20 of real life currency was all it took, like 20
Mhm.
bucks, and I got get gold delivered to I got platinum delivered to me in game, and I went out and bought horses, and it threw ripples across the entire roleplay alliance that we were a part of. And because they didn't know that I had gone out and bought it, the controversy was that we had horses and no one else did. And so suddenly we were elitist assholes because we were leaving everyone else in the dust. And it's like, how are we leaving in the dust? We just have something that makes transportation a little bit easier.
Yeah,
It
you're shaving
also
off
looks,
40% of your run time.
yeah, it also looks
Yeah,
cool as hell to have mounts.
very cool. Yeah.
But it was the controversy because no one knew that we had bought the
No.
money. It was just the fact that we had horses and they didn't. And I remember just at the time being like, really, you guys are sounding like a bunch of petulant, jealous little children who are
Mhm.
like, it's not fair. I want that too. And it's like, well, you could do what
Drop
I
20
did.
bucks.
Drop 20 bucks and you could
Yeah.
have it.
Don't eat at McDonald's twice.
Yeah, but the aspect of cosmetics, that's a good point that I hadn't thought about before in terms of those two meshing.
Oh, yeah.
Because going back to EverQuest 1, getting my two swords for my ranger was literally the coolest thing I ever did. Because when I finally had those, you've got the spell effect
Mhm.
rippling up and down the
Had my leaf
blades, and
blower
it's
on my
just like,
druid.
yeah,
Yep.
yeah, it was such a cool moment. Um, there is that aspect of it for sure. But
Yeah,
the
and
yeah
now it's all
the
and it's only all the more important because back then what you got is what you equipped is what you equipped. That was it. You
mhm.
were done. But now with the whatever system it is that you wanted, the glamour system in Final Fantasy, the system where you could make one item look like another item these days. Like I mean, in Final Fantasy, I went through and did the boring ass quest of getting my relic on my ninja because they're big ninja swords. They're daggers, but they glow red and they look really cool. So I did that not because I needed them, because they're garbage already. I'm level 50, they're level 50, but I'm already got better stuff than them. But they're one of the coolest looking things in the game as far as I'm concerned. So I did it only for that was it. I spent 2-3 hours running around doing that stupid quest. Just it was just fetch stuff. It was super easy. It wasn't a challenge. It just took time.
I think it's
But for the same thing with raiding, people will go. They'll camp that stuff. I mean, we did it for I camped a Barracuda for 18 hours in friggin' Kunark to get that stupid leaf blower. And
hmm
by the way, Barracudas in EverQuest float onto the surface of the land. They do not stay in the water. They will come and attack
come and
you
get
on.
you.
They will come and get you. And Barracudas are mean, man. You don't mess with the Barracuda. Just like snakes could kick in EverQuest, Barracudas can float in the air.
The cock blocking thing. You just made me remember too. What was the wasn't there a griffin in the Eastern Wastes or the Iceland Wastes? Where was the Tower of Frozen Shadow? I forget the name of the zone that was in.
I
Iceland Wastes.
something like
Ice
it was
clad,
it's close
Ice
ice clad
ice
ocean.
clad
Ice Clad.
ice
Yeah.
clad
So
waste.
there was like a griffin or something there that had an eye patch that I wanted for the ranger because it had haste on it. And
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I don't remember the exact circumstance, but I do remember camping it, and it had like
Mm-hmm.
a random 24-hour spawn timer,
And
and
it was just a huge flight path
huge
too.
flight path. And I'll never forget, I camped it for weeks on end, and every single time it would spawn, some other guild would get it before I could get a rally call out to my friends because I would stay up and just wait. And as soon as I would see it, I'd call my guild members. People would come running, but every time you would have like the Uber guys who would have their alts or whatever
Mm-hmm.
camped out in the zone, and so they were already ready to log in, get the mob,
Mhm.
and I eventually gave up on it because I was like, I'm
And that
never
whole
gonna get
time,
this item.
your heart's like
Yeah,
this in your
Yeah.
chest, just like, come on, come on. I hated camping. I'm glad that's not a thing anymore in a
yeah,
way. But at the same time, God, that was a rush that
it
we
was a
just don't have
rush.
these days in MMOs.
I
Mhm.
do appreciate the instancing though because it did get rid of
Hmm.
the. That's why I was asking the question earlier. Does it even still exist these days where guilds can block other guilds? Because with instancing, I feel that that's completely gone away. But I don't play PvP games, so I don't know
Mhm.
about open world
Yeah,
PvP where there's content in a zone. I would imagine that that's still the case.
Yeah, I think
yeah, I
in
would think so.
I think things like Arcade, they do some
It
of
goes
that.
game to game now. Yeah,
Yeah.
like
So
ESO, Final Fantasy, as far as I know, EverQuest 2, World of Warcraft. It's all instanced. I mean, the raid guild itself might not let you in because your gear sucks and you're not
mm,
high enough. And the old EverQuest joke of pulling Mob Ranger down. You don't want to actually be doing a raid where you're constantly having to, the second you've pulled, you've got 2 or 3 people down because they just don't have the resists. It's
Yeah,
just
it's not efficient.
it's it's like hiring somebody to do a job where they have to lift heavy objects, but the guy's 80 years old and can't lift anything heavier than a coconut. It doesn't make you just can't have him there. He's got to either get better or you're gonna have to find someone to replace him.
Which I think is a good point in the sense that in a lot of ways, end game does not make people elitist, although people
mm,
can be elitist assholes. But the
Yeah,
content itself is designed in such a way that it has tiered difficulties, which I've never understood this because I hear the same argument made by role players and casual players. I used to get in trouble a lot with massively OP um, when I would get into it with them when doing stuff with Saga Vasemia
hmm,
because I would hear people say that the game we were designing was hardcore, right? Because it required you to be in a group to do the content. It wasn't designed for solo player. And I would always rebut that with, okay, is Monopoly hardcore? Because you have to have other people to play Monopoly. You're required to play that in a group. What about poker? You're required to play that with other people. Is that hardcore? What about Dungeons and Dragons? Is a tabletop game or any board game out there hardcore simply because it requires
yeah,
other people? But looking at the tabletop example like D&D, even D&D had tiered difficulties. Like you're not going to go fight a a level 20 dragon in basic plate mail at level 10. You're going
right,
to level up, you're going to get your armor class, you're going to get your resists, you're going to get all your magic gear, you're going to get all your buffs, and you're going to go into that fight prepared and
mm,
possibly still die. But it's not just something where you can waltz in with basic starter gear.
yeah.
So tiered difficulty, I don't think it inherently makes people elite.
mhm.
It just does require you to go through
It
that
depends on really it
progression.
depends on their attitude. And to answer your question, Monopoly absolutely is an elitist game and it ruins friendships and families and
It
everyone that
does.
plays it.
I
It's
have
a
an
horrible game.
uncle. We used to make fun of him because, and he's I think 60, mid 60s now, but he would get so into Monopoly, and if he lost, he was literally the type of he would go lock himself in the bathroom and pout for like 3 hours when he would lose at Monopoly. And this is when I was a kid, and I remember just it was so amusing to me that it was like, dude, it's a game. It was not a game for him. It was serious shit, man. Like
Right.
it's Monopoly.
Got to get that boardwalk and Park Place, man. That's how you dominate. But
I haven't played that game in a while.
yeah, and I was looking into this a little bit. I was curious because I always hear like the numbers for Raiders is like 5% for the high tier that do the
Yeah.
content is like 5%. I was curious if I could find data because a lot of these places don't have data. I found some
Hey,
data, at least in Final Fantasy,
I would be
and
interested because the data that I've looked at when we were doing show and tells and stuff with Saga was always it was 3%, under 3%. Hang
well,
on, I'm gonna look at that on my phone.
one thing I found too is that apparently based on region, it is a vastly different number. Now, this is for Final Fantasy 14 Shadowbringers, and it's from February 11th, 2020. So it's a year old, but it's for the Savage raids, which is at the time that would have been the max tier raids in Final Fantasy 14. Now, they have it broken down by data centers. So Mana, Gaia, and Elemental are at 34, 28, and 27% having done the highest tier raid. The thing that's interesting every single one of those data centers is Japanese.
Mm-hmm.
You have to go to fourth place, and that's when you get to North America and then Europe, North America, Europe. But of of them, of the one, two, three, four, seven of them, the first three are Japanese. So they're doing all that high level content, whereas the Westerners, it drops from 27 to 18% completing that,
What's that
which
7.7% one as an FYI?
that's the American Crystal data center, which apparently they don't care about rating whatsoever. So
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know what they're man. This come on, Scrubs, get good. What are you doing out there? Don't
The
even
high,
have
but
good
the
gear.
highest we're seeing, you're saying that Aether server is 18.5% almost
Yeah,
of the server has cleared
of yeah
like
for the
the
North American
total end
servers.
game. So
Yeah, at that time, yeah, for the
correct
Savage.
correct me if I'm wrong, because I may be wrong on this, but as I understand the content in Final Fantasy 14, the end game can be completed by via the matchmaking system, correct?
The
Like
duty finder. Yes.
so
You yeah. You
this is
can
gonna be where I diverge into
well,
the elitist
that's for
asshole.
the story content. There's
Okay.
multiple difficult that's something else that you also some MMOs do and some don't. Final Fantasy, for example, like when I say this is Savage mode, this is for Savage mode for Titan, which Titan is the primal that was in 2.0 from the base game, after they revamped it. So they've been increasing the level difficulty of this to the point where the most recent expansion, they had a version of him that was the most difficult high tier raid that you could do.
Because
So it's you did fight him, like I fought him at level, I don't know, 20 or something like that.
yeah,
But this one here, you have to be level 80 with like crazy at the time it had to be crazy high gear.
because
Mhm.
doesn't
So they
also
have multiples.
World of Warcraft also do the story version that you could do with the matchmaking system, and then they have
Hmm.
something called Mythic Plus, I believe. If that's I
Yeah, I
might be
think they have a
mistaken on
couple
that.
tiers.
Because the distinction I would in my mind that I would like to make is I don't play World of Warcraft, so I don't have firsthand
Yeah.
experience of this.
It's,
But I do have a lot of friends who play the game, and I have been told that you can't do Mythic Plus with a matchmaking system. You can do story
hmm.
mode with matchmaking
Right.
system so that you can at least see the content and experience the content. But if you want to do it on Mythic Plus mode, that requires you to be in a hardcore guild with hardcore players who have the absolute best gear in the game and know their class like nothing else, and they are playing
Yeah.
at that top 1% level. So the question I would have, that data that you were just showing, does that take into account the various difficulty tiers, or is that just saying this is
From
all the
from what
people
I
who
s-
have cleared in
this
game?
is this is Savage only, which
Okay.
for them it's the story mode, then they had hard mode, then there's another mode or two, and then right now, as far as I know, Savage is like the top tier, and they do this for more than like this isn't necessarily a raid. It's their primal. It's just one big boss fight, but they also do this for their raids. They every few patches, like they'll just increase the difficulty. They'll add new mechanics to the bad guys, and and the item level has to be stronger. You've got the DPS checks, where if your DPS isn't on point, the bad guy's building up for a large attack, and if you don't get him knocked down at the end of the fight, you guys wipe instantly.
Oh, by the way,
So
I
they've
found that out even on Star Wars: The Old Republic. I was playing the other day, and I was in single player mode, and I hadn't done. I'm going through the content I haven't done before, and I came up against a fight, and I died, and I was like, "How did I die?" I'm on like single player story mode, and it turns out the fight has a timer that I somehow missed in the chaos of the combat, and at a certain point, you have to switch and start fighting the boss computer, and if you don't get that down in 60 seconds or less, it automatically kills you.
yeah,
So
and
that,
then
yeah,
yeah, and as I understand, Final Fantasy. I know Final Fantasy because that's the game I'm familiar with. But I think World of Warcraft, they all have. There's these special mechanics, which
hmm
is a thing unto itself with the rating. That's part of what makes the challenge different for these raiders is that
there are DPS checks, and
there's DPS check. There's There's tank burst checks. There's healing checks. There's if you're, and especially if you get a fight where all three are needed at one point or another, like this savage stuff here. You can't do that. I mean, yes, technically you can do it in the duty finder. It's not gonna go well for you, more than likely. I
It
mean,
is
you would
interesting
have
to
to
see those
have
numbers
like
so high, though.
gold. Yeah, I was really surprised, and it might just be that this is, this is just one. This is just the Titan fight. It could just be something, and it could just be the way Final Fantasy does these things too. It's the Titan fight is you get dropped into a circle room and you fight Titan. You don't have to go through the whole labyrinth, which is another aspect of raiding that you never know, or varies from game to game. In Final Fantasy, you have typically 3 or 4 bosses per raid. And I've heard in World of Warcraft that could be like you could have 8 or 12 bosses in a single raid,
Yeah, it's the same with
which is
EverQuest
a
2.
I mean, that's vastly different content. It's similar, and that doesn't even go into the, which how high is your raid? Is it, there's a 4-man group, there's the 8-man group, 12-man, 24-man. All those, the higher up you go, those are all still. It's like 12-man group is still a raid, but so is 24. And every one of these games have different content, except for ESO recently, where they took the 24-man, dropped it to 12, and now those 12 people can use their stupid companion instead of the other 12 human living people that you used to get.
Yeah, because I'm remembering the last time I raided hardcore was EverQuest 2 during the Runes of Kunark expansion, and that was
Hmm.
24-man raids. And Vishan's Peak, I remember because this was like the tier 4. You had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 bosses. It
Wow.
was not meant to be completed in a single night. It was a persistent zone, so you're supposed to go in and
Oh
work
yeah, I
through it.
remember that.
Yeah, you go through and work. You go through and you do it over the course of, I think it was like a week was the
I
timer,
think
like
it's
a
7 days. Yeah.
7-day timer. And I remember the data that I've looked at has always been in the 3 to 5%.
Yeah.
Um, but again, this is where I'm wondering because that, like you said, that's a single boss fight, and I know which one you're talking about
Right.
because I've actually played a little bit of that
Yeah, and
game,
he's
and it's
early
the
on.
one where he's on
Big
the
rock guy.
platform, and yeah, there's like the ring. Yeah, I may have
Mm,
done one of those fights. I would argue that there is a big difference between that single boss fight where the mechanics are fairly simple and it's a single boss versus, say, this is tier 4, and in order to get to tier 4 you had to clear tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, which
mhm.
meant weeks to months of going through these zones that require your guild to spend a week clearing the zone and failing multiple times as you figure out the strategies for these
Yeah.
boss mobs. And so you never clear the zone the first time. It takes you 2 or 3 times of going back before you get through. Sometimes maybe 4 or 5 times before you get. And I always look at that and say the type of guild that makes it through that type of content without having emotional blowups and people getting pissy with each other because it is very stressful.
Oh
You're
yeah,
you're
especially when you
spending
fail.
yeah, and when people are failing all the time, you feel like crap. And to get through that as a unit requires a certain amount of character and the ability to play well with others, to not be a pissy little bitch about things, and to be an adult about
Yeah.
failure. On a side note, this popped into my mind because I was playing Minecraft with my brother and my 6-year-old nephew last night, and they died for the first time in lava. We were way down underground mining, and my nephew got a little scared, and so my brother was going back to rescue him, and my brother was in a hurry, and he fell into the lava and died, and he lost all his gear, and he had a full set of enchanted gear, and just we'd mined a bunch of diamonds and redstone, and he was pissed because we've been
Pissed.
playing for like 2 months now and had never died, and then of course, I have to lead my 6-year-old nephew out, and he's like terrified, and we're scaling this giant drop off that's just this mine shaft that went straight down, and he fell. We were literally almost all the way at the top, and he fell and splat and died, and all his gear's down there at the bottom.
Uh.
And we'd been playing for 2 hours, and he got so upset. That was the first time he'd ever died with
Hmm.
like gear, and like somewhere far, far, far away from the home. and he was devastated, and he got extremely pissy. And he's a 6 year
Mm-hmm.
old kid. I cannot blame a 6 year
Right.
old kid.
Man up, wimp.
But I was
Yeah.
literally remembering, failing on raid bot, and you get 30-year
Yeah.
old, 40-year-old adults who turn into 6 year old children.
Yeah.
Yeah, like throw their keyboard through the wall because they fail on a boss mob. That to
There's-
me has always been the defining aspect of being in a top tier hardcore guild
Mm-hmm.
is the ability to pull yourself together and be a part of that elite group that's going to do it at that level and go through 6 months of hell to get the best gear in the
Yeah.
game, as opposed to one single boss fight. I'm not
Yeah. And
discrediting that data, by
no,
the
and you're
way.
good. You're right. Well, they actually do have actual raids. I actually
Sure.
just this last night I was playing through the 50 level 50 content because I'm only level 50. I'm still playing through, but it's the Crystal Tower, and it is like that. It's it came out one level, then you get to the next one, and then there's the one after that, and it's a 24-man raid. Now, given level cap is 80, so it's actually really easy,
Oh yeah,
but
but
when it came out, and then there's also raid content that is at the top tier that came out with Shadowbringers that does have those item level requirements like I was talking to you, and it's difficult. Like it requires a legitimate raid group. They do the would you call it DKP?
yeah,
Is that what it's called? Yeah, they
dragon
do
kill
that
points, but
stuff.
I don't know that anybody.
Yeah,
Do people still do that?
it's as far as I know, it's that when as soon as you said, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. That's what they as far as I know, they still call it that.
Yeah, because
A lot of places do.
I think most games these days, and this is the other aspect that I think's changed a lot, because back in the day, the raid bosses might only drop one or two class specific things, and a
Hmm.
lot of games these days, when you kill the boss mob, everybody gets a piece of loot, or everybody gets a coin that can
Yeah,
be turned in for a piece of loot or something
the
like
the
that.
Crystal Tower I just did after each boss, because it takes 24, so I think each group is 8 people. Um, does that equal 24? I'm
Yeah,
really great at math. I just want to say I'm the best at math.
I'm not
Wonderful.
either, but I think it
Yeah,
makes
8.
24.
So there's basically three groups that make up each of us 8. So we'd kill the boss, and 3 treasure chests. Group A, B, and C would pop up.
So
You
everybody.
only get what's in yours, and usually, from what I saw last night, it was 1, maybe 2 items until you got the very last boss. Might drop 3 or 4, but some of those are like the dumb wind-up pet toys that will follow you, or music scrolls you can play in your house
Yeah,
that
so
play the
in
in-game
those
music in
cases,
your
you still
house.
do need to use some sort of a DKP system or officer
Yeah,
assigned loot because it's not giving something to
yeah.
everybody.
And of course, in Final Fantasy, that only works if you have multiples of the same class, because Final Fantasy itself, like a lot of MMOs these days, if you aren't that class, you can't need on it. Like when Dragoons, because of course I wasn't on a Dragoon, so that's what kept dropping. But Dragoon would come up and need was blacked out. I could greed on it or I could pass, but I could not
That's
need. No,
actually
even if I had
brilliant.
another Dragoon character, which I actually have. My guys, I actually have. He can be a Dragoon, but because I was on Ninja, I couldn't roll for the Dragoon stuff as a
That's
need.
that's really good, and I wish more games would do that because that's one of my biggest complaints having gone back and done pickup raids over the
People that
last few
didn't know
years.
need before greed.
Yeah, people who say that, I can sell it and get coin for it to buy
Therefore, I
something.
need
Therefore,
it.
I need it because
I was
I
the
can make the
douchebag
money.
early on that made that argument. I will have you know. There was early on in EverQuest. I had never been introduced to that, and
Okay,
I
that's a
made
fair
that
point.
argument.
That's a fair point.
I made the argument. I was a moron. I will admit that freely. I was wrong. I was very, very wrong.
Yeah,
No,
that is not the way
I
Need
was
for Greed
wrong.
works, sir.
No, it is not.
So I like the
Uh,
fact that Final Fantasy does that.
greed is good. Is not really working in MMOs.
So
Works on
I
Wall
would be
Street.
like you did say earlier that the data is just not out there. And I have some data that I've looked at,
Yeah,
but it's also somewhat older data.
it's
Um,
hard to find. I was
so
scouring for it.
my data comes from like EverQuest 2, I think was the most recent data that I've got where we looked at, um, where it was under 5% of the total game population ever got like mythical weapons and then beyond. Like they actually went out there and did the raids. And the reason for most of that is just because the time commitment was so great to get through all of that content with a 24-man group of people who would consistently show up 3-4 nights a week, um, and do it. Um, that it was just not a lot of people did it, and I don't know what it was in EverQuest 1, but I feel like it was even maybe less than
Yeah.
that, the same amount or less,
Yeah.
because EverQuest 1 required there were no persistent zones, and so you had to go in there and just do it until you, because the thing was everything respawned in EverQuest 1.
Yeah.
So you didn't want to have to clear it again the next night. So you would go in and you would just keep going
Camp. Yep.
until you get to that final boss. And that would require sometimes you'd be up for, I didn't do very many 24-hour sessions in that game. Which one did you just
Yeah.
share now? I'm looking at another data point.
Oh,
It,
I put up that's something just the for Guild Wars 2, Elder Scrolls, and Final Fantasy over the course of their lifespan, how many have actually the number of raids each one has added. I wish they had World of Warcraft on there, but I couldn't find how many raids World of Warcraft because I just find that
yeah.
stuff it's kind of fascinating because I'd love to know. I guess I could
Yeah.
how many raids.
So
Go ahead.
I think that you have to account for both, the casuals and
Wow, Final Fantasy 14 is way beyond
the
the other two.
the elite
Yeah.
raiders, because I think that the it's not something. I mean, you could have more time one year, and the next year you don't have time anymore, and you become a casual.
Mhm.
It happens to everybody. People have kids, their life changes, and they just can't do keep up with that monotonous schedules. But you might have the same thing. The kid might go to school or college, and then all of a sudden you have all this time again. So you might become a elite raider too. So I think that's when you're planning these games, that's something you need to take into account. Um, People's life, they just change. It's not cyclical.
Yeah. It's
Even
closest I found. Apparently, World of Warcraft has, as of this is 4 years ago. They had 40 as of 4 years ago raids.
40% or 40
No, just 40 raids.
40
Apparently,
raids.
that's quick and dirty Google search. Very dirty.
Yeah, because even I'm looking, because like even if we use the most conservative numbers out there, which would be that first, hang on, I gotta open it up again on my phone. What is it, like 30 some percent of Final Fantasy, that one raid,
Yeah,
34.6. So 35% say have cleared
at
that
least that one. Yeah,
that one tier. Even if you use that conservative number, 35%, you're still looking at a 65% player base. And that's assuming that you just use that number across the board because that was one server. The rest goes
yeah,
progressively down. So the
for the
reality is it's
exact same
probably more
thing.
like 25% if you want to look at Final Fantasy 14. Maybe the average. I'm not going to do
If
the
you
math
average
right
it out.
now. But
No.
let's say the average comes out to 25%. You're still dealing with 75% of the population who are never going to see the end game content, either by choice or
Yeah,
just because they don't have the time to get to that. And so I feel that 25% is a massively huge number compared to the things that I've seen, but I don't know Final Fantasy 14.
yeah.
So that could
But
just
even
be
if we go with the standard of that, it may be 5 or 10%. That's even. I mean, that's crazy low to do
yeah, but
that much stuff.
I would
Yeah,
also probably argue that because my data is a little bit old, I would probably argue that the games have gotten they have made in-game a little more achievable for
yeah,
everybody. Because I can look at Star Wars: The Old Republic as an example, and I feel like everyone I ever see or talk to has done end game in that game because they've made it so
yeah,
that you can just do it all through the matchmaking system. And same thing with World of Warcraft. Everyone's done end game because you can do it all on story mode at this point. Now, not everyone's done it on Mythic Plus, but
right.
everyone has done it because they've wanted to make these games more accessible. Um, but even if you use, say, a 25% number, 75% haven't, um, that's 75% of the player base who we can call them casuals, we can call them the average gamer, whatever you want to call them. It's not an insulting term to be called a
Right.
casual
No.
gamer. I am very much a casual gamer, and I have
Hmm.
been since I quit raiding in 2009. I play 15 hours max MMORPG. Actually, that's probably 15 hours max a week in total is my total game time that I spend. Because it's like 2 hours a day is what I do anymore. I could play a lot
Yeah.
more, but I have a spouse who does not play, so we do a lot of other things,
Right.
like Netflix and
Because your
walking and
life
photography.
changes. You're
Right, sure.
married and you have a
Yeah.
spouse. Yeah.
Now my previous partner and I played together, so that's when I used to play. I no lifed it,
Right.
and I was talking about the other day with someone. I was like, if Chris played, I would no life it again. I would totally no life it because I
Mhm.
have the time. Um, it's just we have different interests. 75%, let's just argue that that's the number. 75% of the people don't care about or won't ever see in game. So that brings us around to the point of the conversation where, talking about why is it that so many companies continue to focus on creating end game content or steamrolling players through the shitty parts of the game. And I'm going to point at Final Fantasy XIV because
Mhm.
the whole first act of that game, they have now allowed people to just bypass with a cash fee.
More than that, actually, I think you can. I think you can actually pay cash and skip all the way up to Shadowbringers, which is the most
Third
recent
expansion?
expansion. Yeah, I think you can pass s- uh, Skyward. Skyward. I got Skyward Sword stuck in my head from Zelda now.
Yeah.
But the dragon one and then the Stormbreaker after that, you can
Well,
actually you can level up all the way and just pay a potion to skip them
well,
now.
it's
Although you're doing
almost the
yourself a
same.
disservice.
It's almost the same content though. It's just the difficulty's different, right? It's just
Yeah,
a switch. It's just a switch. So that's a lot. That brings it a lot more obtainable to the casuals than uh, than
yeah.
it was before.
Well, and some of it
So
is a
it's a
slog.
different design. It's a different design than what EverQuest was, uh, or
Yeah.
those other games. So
And to play devil's advocate against you and myself on this one, that I know there are a lot, like, again with Final Fantasy, and I know a lot of others do this. So, what is uh, the top tier end game rating? So once the next expansion or patch comes out and something new comes out, the casual it that become and the gear level goes up. You're then stronger than you would have been at the if you can ease the gear levels go up as the game progresses. So then what used to be a high tier raid guild that only the elitist of the elite could get to that number and get those kills, you can now do casually in the next expansion from like the first 5 quests in the new expansion. You get brand new gear that completely negates everything the raiders did time and time again. And this is a cycle that happens in pretty much every MMO. You raid, you
Unfortunately,
raid,
yeah.
you raid, you get the top tier, new
Expansion
expansion
comes out.
comes out, and now Squeezy McSteve Cheese over here that has just ignored everything does like 10 quests at the beginning zone, and he automatically has the exact same gear as this top tier raider. Sure, it looks like garbage, but just as good as
Stat
his.
wise, yeah.
Yeah, and then now he can go and do what he was missing out on before because he wasn't willing to put in the 50, 60, 100 hours of raid tier. And of course, then the cycle starts all over for the Raiders once again because they yearn and must beat this filthy casual over here that just got this from this thing. It's a wicked cycle that keeps people, it's smart. It's how MMOs make their money and retain players, but it is the cycle that it is.
I'm trying to think
So,
back because I
yeah.
remember I remember my epic weapons in EverQuest 1 lasting me like 2 years before
oh yeah,
I
Mm-hmm.
updated them. So I mean
it's
that
different
was
design.
2 expansions. I did not update my weapons in Velius. I updated my armor in Velius,
Yeah.
but I didn't need to update my weapons in Velius. I didn't update my weapons until we got to Luklin.
Yeah. And then
And
and then they came out with I know Final Fantasy does this too with because they have the relic weapons, but
mm,
then they've got the Zenith weapon, which is the next, they keep going. And I know Final
that's how
Fantasy
EverQuest
had
2 did it. Yeah,
EverQuest 2 had the epic weapons, and I forget it was
it's
basically
you
like
had
the upgraded
prismatics.
epic weapon.
Yeah, you
Prismatics.
had the
Thank you.
prismatic, then the prismatic 2.0, and then you had the claymore quests, and then you had
Yes.
the
They
mythic
kept increasing
weapons.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is again, it's a treadmill, but it's a very smart treadmill.
Yeah.
And it also it lets the raiders stay raiders. It keeps them at the elite playable level or whatever they want to call it, which I mean, I'm not going to take that away from them. You put that much time and effort into it. you watch the World of Warcraft episode from South Park where they're like, "All right, Cal, you got to put on," that's not.
It's
I
not
mean, they got that
incorrect.
right. It's not wrong. I mean, the only difference was is it was just the 3 or 4 of them instead of 24 people. I mean, watch the Leroy Jenkins video. That's exactly how raiding goes, except for the guy running in yelling Leroy Jenkins. But they were talking about, make sure everybody's got your stuff. It is a lot to coordinate, not to mention just the bare fact of getting 24 human individuals at the same place at the same time is a monumental effort in itself.
I would also say that it has become infinitely easier with voice
Yes.
chat than it used to be.
Discord.
Yeah, because you used to have to do it all by hand. Because I remember in early EverQuest, it was all you text. Everything was text. You didn't have voice chat. So when like Ventrilo and TeamSpeak
Guild
came along,
launch.
yeah, it just
Remember that?
I don't remember that.
Oh, it was Guild Launch was a website that geared specifically
Oh,
towards
the
uh
what's it called? Yeah,
it
the
was a
websites for
forum.
guilds.
Yeah, it was
I
a
do
website
remember
for
that.
guilds
Yeah.
from across it did it for all sorts of games. But that's where we did it for roleplay. Guild, I saw guilders, they like, all right, here's the night we're gonna do it. How many people can make it? They sound off and they do a
Yeah, because
poll.
Guild Launch had a calendar built in, and you
Yep.
could. I do remember Guild Launch.
Yeah. Yeah. Takes you back, right?
God, man, shut up. Feeling
But
the
now,
the white is showing in the beard more.
yeah. But Discord
Yeah.
I mean, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
For raiders.
I remember doing a kill raid, and then doing keybinds of everything that everybody has to do. So like I had to do a slash keybind. So I had like 30 of those bad boys. I had to press it. There's what you do here. Here's what
Mhm.
you do there, and then it would just spam everybody, and
Yeah, I'll
everybody
never
had to
forget.
follow
Yeah,
along.
you're right because I always remember because it would be like if you needed to refresh your buff, you would have a keybind set up, one for the shaman, one for the cleric, one for the druid. Because as soon as a buff would go off, you'd be like, you'd hit that button, regen please to the, and then the
Yep.
the shaman
Global
would have
cooldown.
the shaman
Yeah.
would have a keybind set up to where he would just hit it and it would automatically buff on the last person who sent him a tell. I do remember that. That
Mhm.
was
It
that.
got intricate. It got intricate, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
You can just see Renfail reminiscing in his head right
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. I remember the Avatar of War in that. I think it was the Avatar of War in that zone. Um, Man, there were some good raids in that game, and also very, very, very hard raids. I remember wiping over and over and over to Benral Sather and in Kunar Castle in KC. That fight was just brutal. Um, Good times, good memories. So the question I would have though too is even though it is sort of a natural progression, and we followed that chain now for 20 years in MMORPGs, is it necessarily the best way? Because I know a lot of people, on the one hand, you have the raiders who always complain because they will chew through the content in a matter
Right.
of weeks these days.
Especially now, yeah.
Nowadays, it used to take guilds 6 months.
Months. It was newsworthy when somebody killed the was it the prismatic dragon or the
Yeah,
sleeper? Remember when the sleeper
yep,
finally woke? That was huge.
yep, and that would
Especially because he glitched out and killed other people in every other zone too.
yeah, and that was something that only a certain amount of people could ever do on the server. So it was a
Mhm.
big deal. But
Yeah.
it used to take guilds 6 months to clear through expansion of content, and then expansions used to come out every single year. So you would do 6 months, and then you would have 6 months of nothing. And nowadays, guilds can clear things in a matter of weeks. And then I was just on, I think it was on TikTok today. I was seeing a World of Warcraft meme where somebody was talking about they just cleared all the most recent raid, and I was just laughing because I was like, "We're talking about that tonight," and it was the perfect timing for that
Yeah.
to pop up in my feed. But it was somebody joking about how they spent in like 3 weeks cleared all the raid content, and now they're just waiting for the next patch. And it's like, well, what am I gonna do while I wait for the next patch?
Yeah.
I guess I'm gonna go play, and I'm gonna go play Final Fantasy
Final Fan.
14. That was the meme. Was there's nothing for
Yep.
me to do in WoW, so I'm gonna go play Final Fantasy 14, which led
Which
me
is
to
ironic
this
because this week Final Fantasy 14 hit its peak
on Steam, wasn't it?
on Steam, 47,000, which the previous was like 41,000. They beat it by like 6,000
And then
people.
like last week or the week before was when it was like, oh, it has more concurrent players in World of Warcraft, first time ever.
Yeah.
For it's the
Mm,
WoW killer,
yeah.
which it hasn't
Wow
sold nearly as
killer.
many
Yeah.
copies, but
No,
for the
it's
moment, it's
yeah,
extremely
and it might
popular.
be on through, in Steam, of course, it's, a lot of, you can only go so far on that, but it's still, it's still a pretty big deal. But a lot of it is because those World of Warcraft players are coming over for some, they
Bored.
finished the content already, which is
They're
so
bored,
weird.
and there's nothing
Yeah.
else to play right now. So
Which is sad.
the question I have though is why don't companies spend more time on creating horizontal content as opposed to vertical content? Because I know that's something that obviously the game is being revamped right now, but one of the things that I was working on with Saga of Lucemia was less focus on the end game and more focus on, because one of the things I loved about early EverQuest was there was so much to do, and it didn't matter what level you were at. You had your range of like anywhere from 6 to 10 zones that you could choose from for a level range. And so you could level one character up doing this path, you could level another character up doing that path, a third
Hmm.
character up doing a complete, and you could, I've literally, to this day, as much as I've played EverQuest 1, there are places I've never seen in that game because I never played evil races. I
Oh,
only ever played elves and halflings. So I always took certain paths throughout the game. Now I took different paths over the years,
right.
but that's one of the things I loved about EverQuest was there was so much horizontal content for players to experience as opposed to this linear vertical path, which say EverQuest 2 took, where it's very
Hmm.
much if you're good, you do Antonica. If you're bad, you do what's the other one?
Common lands.
Common Lands, right? And and it was kind of like these two paths, but they all went the same way. It was like if you did
Yeah, and then
Antonica, you would
eventually and then
eventually
they met in the middle.
they met in the
Yeah.
middle, but it was very much a linear path where you're always going to take the same path no matter how many
Mhm.
alts you do, and you're always going to have that same experience. And so it became this thing of, well, all we're just going to do is we're going to rush our way to this point because that's where the fun starts.
Right.
um, and I miss games putting more effort into creating. I think Vanguard did a very good job of this as well. Obviously, this is another old dead game, but Vanguard had a lot of things to do because it had a lot of the not the revamped game that Sony did, but the launch version of the game. You had starting areas for all the races, and
Mhm.
each starting area had, I mean, lots of content, like up to like level 30, as I recall.
That had to be like a Brad McQuaid kind of thing because he did that. He's responsible for EverQuest
Yeah.
too, and that. So that had to have been something from his brainchild that only he seemed to be able to get done.
Games these days, we've talked about this. We had a lot of brainstorming discussions and we talked with a lot of different companies about doing it like that, and we got told don't do it like that over and over and over again. And I was lucky in the sense that the way I was building that game was, you know, the elves and everybody had gone into hiding, so the idea was, well, you're only going to be a human at the beginning anyway, so I don't have to deal with all these other starting areas because of the lore. But also from a design perspective, I'm glad that the lore was like that because the nightmare scenario that I discovered while talking to lots of other people was that when you split your player base up like that and you have a huge game, it makes it incredibly difficult for people to group up with each other. And what's the number one reason you're making an MMORPG?
Hmm.
You want people to play together.
Community. Yeah.
It kind of defeats the purpose when you have a game where you have starting areas that are hugely spread out and can't be easily accessed, which is where fast travel comes into play because
Hmm.
that's how people get around it these days.
Yeah, and again, I know I'm the one that knows Final Fantasy 14, but they do kind of what you're talking about. At least they have the three starting cities of Limsa Lominsa, Ul'dah, and Gridania, and depending on what class you'd pick is what determines where you're at because the Lancers guilds in Gridania, the Gladiators
Yeah,
in Ul'dah, blah blah blah.
I vaguely
But
remember like once you get to like level 10 or something, you automatically get sent
yeah,
off.
yeah, they'll show you go through the quest line,
Like
but you do
the crystal
each
system or whatever that
yeah, each
portal
area around
system.
there is level 1 through 20 or give or take. So you can actually level up those 3 different paths. And through the main story quest, it does like, oh, and here's, you can go over here. We'll shoot you on an airship. Then you uh, attune to the aetheryte crystal, and you could teleport. But for the most part, whatever your starting zone in is pretty much where you just do your quests at. And then you might, since with that game you can just switch a weapon and switch to another class. Then if you want to level up through there, then you go to one of the other cities and do the quest real quick through there. Or really, what most people do is just do the dungeon finder, and you get a bonus, and it levels
Because
very quickly these days.
that was one of the things before Vanguard got turned over to Sony. There was no fast travel system, so
Yeah.
it was a massive game and it felt massive. And there was just lots, like you could literally, because they had the 3 different continents as I recall, you could literally go 1 to 50 just on your own continent and never need to leave that continent. But then once Sony got their hands on it, one of the first changes that happened was suddenly this crystal system got put in, and suddenly
Mm-hmm.
you could teleport to the other continent instead of having to take a boat, and it kind of ruined it for a lot of people because they went, oh,
Shrinks the world
yeah, it
down.
makes the
Yeah.
world tiny, and now it doesn't feel nearly as epic. And oh, by the way, all those weeks and months we spent getting the resources to build a guild ship are now worthless because that guild ship is now pointless because it just looks pretty now instead of actually serving a
Yep.
purpose of getting us from one place to another. So yeah, I look at some of the old games and I see these big worlds with lots of content, very horizontal, and then I see modern games which have a very much linear vertical experience. And I wonder how much of that, because again, the other thing to think about too is like when you're talking about these older games, especially Warcraft, EverQuest 2, Lord of the Rings Online, I would assume that the majority of people who play those games, who still maintain subscriptions and whatever, have lots of in-game characters because they've been playing the game for so long that all their characters are at the cap. So the incentive is to continually produce content that is
Okay.
going to
Mhm.
challenge those players and keep
Mm.
them wanting to pay their subscription and buy the expansions. And also why when you get into the game, the first thing they do is promote, XP pots and level boosts because they want you to be able to experience the content with other people
Right.
because that's the way you stay subscribed. But it also, at that point, I'm like, yeah, but I'm missing out on 14 years of game development
Hmm.
or 10 years of game development, whatever the case may be. There's dozens of zones and hundreds of quests.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it. I could probably go on and on why I don't like it. One thing is that wasted that art that you just lose
Hmm.
when you just go through content like that. All the dev time that's been put into the game, everything that's magical that those technicians, artists, engineers put into the game, uh, you now have bypassed
Yeah. Just
in a
zip right.
moment.
Yeah. Well, in
So.
Final Fantasy 14, especially, you don't, when the games, each expansion came out, you had the MSQ, but you also had to do every side quest. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sufficient level as things progressed in the MSQ because you have to be, each quest for the main story, you have to be a certain level. Now, I haven't done a single side quest going through the 2.0 to 2.55 because they've increased the experience so that you only have to do the main story quest,
You
which
just,
is cool because now I'm not losing the thread of the
yeah.
story, but I've not done any side quests. So all the dialogue, all the whimsical little side stories, all that stuff. I mean, given I've personally I have done them already, so I am perfectly happy to skip them and not do the stuff that I've already, you know, that's not needed. But for anybody new, there's no reason whatsoever
You
for them
just
to do that
explained
content.
exactly the reality of Star Wars: The Republic these days because on a free-to-play account, even on the free-to-play account,
Mm-hmm.
you can level through that game and it goes so quickly and they give you bonus XP pots for quest rewards. You don't have to touch any of the world quests anymore. You can literally just do your class quests.
Those were
I did 2 of
So good in
those.
that game.
And that's the thing. They are extremely good. Now, of course,
Well written dialogue,
I've done them
voices, everything. Yeah,
3
I
or
have
4
too. Yeah.
times now. So I don't it's not a big deal to me to skip them at this point. But if I was a new player coming into that game, you're missing out on like if you're playing the base game, which is the original game up to level 50, I believe it is.
Hmm. Yeah,
Um, you're missing out on like 80% of the game when you
easily.
when you don't actually see all that content because there's so many amazing side quests because
The
there's the themed world quests for each planet. Then there's all the side quests. Then there's those little like 2 and 4 man dungeons that are
Yeah,
scattered throughout the
the
planets.
Revenites that are on not Korriban, the Sith homeworld. I forget the name of it now. Not Korriban's
Draken, Drummond Koss.
Droman Koss.
Yeah.
There's that when I remember that side quest still to this day, where there's Revenites, people that worship Revan as almost like a
Off
Jedi
in the
dark side
jungle forests.
deity.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
they're often like the
and
jungle forest living in the middle of nowhere.
no reason at all to do that now.
Nope.
You can completely walk. You can
Yep.
walk through there and be like, "Huh, this looks like an interesting thing." Anyway,
Off I go on my class quest.
yeah,
And it's unfortunate. Now, I will also say though that the game, I think you mentioned this on one of our previous episodes that you were on, um, like the Knights of the Fallen Empire. That was like peak. Those 2 expansions
yes,
were like peak Star Wars.
those were so good.
And they were also good because they were very linear in nature, and because by
Hmm.
that point they had gotten rid of all the side quests. It was just like you're just on a mission right now. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's why I like that is because that's one of those things I love about Final Fantasy XIV's Morn Story Quest. It's good storytelling,
yeah,
and that's what the Fallen Empire did. Was it told a good story? Also, the cinematics are just the best fucking Star Wars thing you're gonna get ever. I mean, it's up there with like Mandalorian and all that stuff. It's just I love SWTOR's cinematic trailers. They're just the best thing ever.
yeah.
They're still hold up to this day.
The
Sorry,
uh the flip
fangirl.
side of that too is that because I play a lot of I keep an active subscription in Lord of the Rings Online because it's the one MMORPG that I just keep a sub to it. Um, and I play it pretty regularly. And that game has not gone the way of say rushing you to
Yeah.
end game. Now, they do offer you level boosts.
Yes.
You can actually do one to level 50. I think one's at level 80, and the other one's like a level 100 or 120. But they are not cheap. It's like 40, 50, and $60. They're not
Yeah.
like $10 things. So, and that game is also huge enough and has really unique starting areas and everything else. But I would say that even though that game has progressed over the years, it does not try to push you through and speed you through the game. And you very much have to do world quests to keep up with the um, main storyline. Even if you're on a VIP subscription like I am, and you're getting rest experience, and they'll do like VIP weekends where you get 50% or 100% XP bonus, you still have to do side quests and world quests to keep your levels high enough to do the main quests. So it keeps you constantly. I feel that that's one game that's done a very good job over the years of actually keeping the players engaged in the entire world as opposed to only pushing them towards the end game. Now, obviously, the content that they produce the updates that they do every 6 months or so are all geared towards the end game player. Um, but it's not only raids anymore. It's also storyline content and news,
Mhm.
opening up new chunks of the world and everything else. But they also do one of the things I appreciate about that game, which I think other games do as well. Like they do a lot of seasonal um, events, which bring players back to the old zones on a regular basis. I feel like there's every month or two there's some sort of seasonal event going on in Lotro that brings players back to the first 10 or 15 zones. So there's constantly people. No matter where you go in that game, you're constantly running into people as opposed to EverQuest. If you try to go log into live EverQuest these days, like the retail servers,
Mhm.
the first 50 zones are completely dead. There's
There's
no one
nothing.
there at all. If they're all off at the very max, level 180 or whatever it is these days, and they're not. There's nothing. It's a dead game for all intents and purposes. Literally, like Scribbles was saying, there's hundreds.
Yeah.
of zones and thousands of man hours that were put into creating art and assets and pathing and
Yeah.
mechanics and
I
everything. And it's just gone.
just looked it up. There's over 500 zones in the original EverQuest.
Like the base game or
No,
like
just
no,
EverQuest as it
all
is right now with all the
yeah,
expansions. There's over 500
yeah.
zones. There's no way any World of Warcraft probably can't populate that many zones in to any reasonable degree. That's a lot of zones. Of course, it's a really old game, but
And it's had a lot of.
Yeah.
I
yeah,
mean,
that's
they used to do expansions every single year for like
mhm.
12 years. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know. I just feel like there are examples of games that have done a good job of doing the horizontal while still keeping
Yeah.
some vertical. And then there's other games where it's so vertical that the rest of the game is completely empty.
Yeah. I actually looked it up. Final Fantasy 14 to skip to Stormblood, it's $25 to skip. If you created a brand new character to skip all the way there, and it's also another $25 to level up a class to that. So it'd be 50
50
bucks.
bucks if you wanted to skip it
50
all.
bucks to actually do that, to
Yeah,
just
so
skip all of it.
that's like Lotro. Lotro charge you 40 or 50 bucks if you want
Yeah.
to skip stuff.
You know.
Which is why despite the fact that I've played that game all these years, I'm not willing to spend 50 bucks to skip because I like the content.
Yeah,
Um,
it's fun.
and so I will skip a lot of stuff that I am just like I know the fastest routes now. Um, but I still enjoy. I can't tell you how many times in Lotro I've rolled elves and
I
hobbits
don't know. I don't know.
20 times.
I think skipping the content's cheating. Might as well just get the
It's
game
just
genie out. Get the game
yeah,
genie out and
basically
plug
they're
it into
just
the Nintendo
it
and
seems to be just another way for a lot of these companies it's just
It's
they're
monetization.
trying desperately to get people into the game and if like I for Final Fantasy that first the base game A Realm Reborn it's perfectly fine, but there is a lot of there's a lot of tediousness to it. When you get to Stormblood and the Heaven's Ward, that's what it's called, not Heaven's Sword. Heaven's Ward is the second expansion. That one with the dragons is it's really when the story takes off. So giving and apparently too the less you skip the cheaper it is to do that. You actually it goes down in price. I think two expansions is 18 and I think one expansion's like 12 or 10 12 bucks.
Yeah, it
So
is a monetization thing.
that's where I think a lot of it comes from, more than one. They're not doing it to help the players, they're doing it to help themselves for the most part, in the cloak of helping the players. But I don't disagree with you, Scribbles. It's just
I don't know.
there's
I
what we
have
would
this,
want things to be, and then there's the reality of
yeah,
they need to make millions.
yeah. I have the stigma about people that I know that that if I'm like a level 100 player and then all of a sudden I see this guy with that same armor that boosts up to like 90 or whatever it is, and he has that armor. I'm gonna go see that guy and
Mhm.
I'm gonna have this
Well,
angry face for him, this stink face for him.
the good news is he'll be slash kicked out of the group when he has no idea what he's
how to
doing in
play.
the next dungeon. He's like,
Yeah.
how do I make
Yep.
buttons?
Yeah.
What's the old thing? How I mine for fish?
Uh,
Yeah. Mm-mm.
but
He's not going to be good
it's
at it.
that stigma. It's I don't even
Learn
want to be around you.
learn to
Yeah, I
play,
judge
noob.
them. I'm not saying I judge them. I'm
Uh,
just saying they're going to burn in hell. But I'm not judging them.
Are there any games? I'm trying to think of have there been any games that reuse the old zones as opposed to because I feel like most games when they build an expansion, it's always new continent, new zones,
Mhm.
going to the plains, going to the underworld, new islands to
Cat
explore.
World of War Catalyst is about
That's
the
the
only one
only
I
one I
know that
could think of where they
that's the yeah,
destroyed the world and then you went back and
rebuilt it.
re-experienced it.
Um
oh,
Yeah, I don't think Guild War. The other one I think Guild Wars 2, if I'm remembering right. It's been a long time. I think they did some of your horizontal progression quite often. I think they didn't always keep bumping the level cap up every time they had uh, not necessarily an expansion but an update or something like that. They didn't always keep bumping things up, whether it be because Final Fantasy doesn't bump up the level. They do it every expansion, but in between expansions, it's not the level that goes up,
It's just
but
a
it's the
content
item.
update.
It's the item level that goes up, which is still upward progression. And if I remember, if anybody out there knows, don't you know? Feel free to leave an angry comment towards Scribbles. I think they had a lot of that horizontal stuff in between their big expansions
Well,
that they did
because
that really well because that's a very that one in particular is a very story driven game. Like the world progresses. Like there's certain things that have happened in Guild Wars 2 that you can never play now. It's
yeah,
gone.
living
That
world
content is
stuff.
just gone. They've moved beyond it. So I want to say that that's one that has done your horizontal stuff
Well, because
to some degree.
I look at tabletop. So I'm gonna look at Dungeons and Dragons for a minute, and I feel like when you look at the modules, the campaign modules that get pushed out for the official Dungeons and Dragons, um, Forgotten Realms universe, it's not excuse me, it's not always upward progression. Every like the modules are it's like this module might be designed for levels 1 to 5. This one's for levels 4 to 8. This one's for levels 10 to 12, and then they turn around and do another one that's level
Mhm.
1 to 5. And then maybe another one that's level 1 to 12. Like I feel like in tabletop when they do campaign modules or quote unquote expansions, they're not always trying to push because
Yeah.
max level is level 20 as I if I'm not mistaken. I'm not intimately familiar with 5th edition, but I want to say 20th level is the highest you can go. So there's not this constant like they're not trying to say okay, now we're going to go to level 30 and then we're going to go to level 40 and then we're going to go to level
Yeah.
50. It's just
Well,
they're constantly creating new adventures
right. But
within that
but
level 1 to 20 range.
that's more that's kind of the vast difference between because with a video game, you can't really do that. If you're going to do that, you've basically have to have people start a new character over all the time, which
Mhm.
in D&D is super easy. And if a D&D module comes out and it's geared for level 5 or 10, well, it's super easy just to roll up a level
Level
5
5
character.
character, yeah.
Yeah, just like that. You've just written it and it boom. But you don't have to necessarily play through the campaign
That's
to get there.
true.
You
That's a
can
good
make
point.
an easy little backstory like, yes, I'm a novice. Not even. I'm not. I'm just an apprentice wizard now. I'm no longer a novice. I'm not quite a master. We grant you the rank of Jedi, but we not yet make you a master. That kind of a thing. It's really easy with those tabletop things. You just write a little backstory in your little section,
Yeah,
as
that's a good
opposed to a
point.
video game where you have to spend $25 to skip 70 levels. You know. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's an
it would
interesting
be
thing.
nice if they would do that stuff because there are also other things that video games do, that especially MMOs, where they'll several of them they'll just level you down for that content. Like you can go to something, the raids. A lot of the raids in Final Fantasy, EverQuest 2, you can do them at your max level when but there might be 40 levels under you, so they
Scale you
lower your
down.
level. You still have slightly better stats than you would have. They lower your gear level, and you're stronger than you would have been probably if you were there, but
Well, because I remember
you're
EverQuest 2
you're
used to
dumbed
have
down.
the mentor system. I don't know how they do it these days
Yeah.
because I haven't played in a very long time, but that's how the mentor system works. It's like,
Hmm.
oh, I'm level 80. My buddy just started playing the game. He's level 20. I can mentor down to him. He'll get a bit of a bonus XP.
Hmm.
I'm a little tougher than I would have been at level 20, but like all your abilities that are level 20 or above are grayed out and you can't even use them.
Yep.
You can only
Yeah.
use what's up to level 20. I think
Final
since
Fantasy
then
does that
I
too,
think
yeah.
since then they might have done it to where just you can still use your abilities, but they've just been way scaled down. I don't really know
Yeah.
though because I haven't played that game in
It sounds
very long
about right
time.
from what I remember. Yeah.
And because other games instead of doing it that way, they've just done the whole we're gonna just get rid of levels like ESO and World of Warcraft, and now it's just
Hmm.
scaled. So now it's just everything is scaled to your level.
Yeah,
Um,
which means even
eh,
though they still have levels and like in Elder Scrolls, the levels in the overworld completely pointless. They serve absolutely no purpose whatsoever. But they just did a new combat point upgrade that went from 810 was the highest in the combat points that you could get, the CP, and I think it's 3,000 now. And they completely revamped the system post 1 to 50.
how are raids
And the
in ESO, by the way?
I don't like them. They're not fun. But that was another thing they actually recently did, was because in Elder Scrolls you didn't have the holy trinity of tank, DPS, and heals. You kind of all were kind of a hodgepodge. You still had people that would be in that category, but there was a lot of that whole Venn diagram. There was a lot of overlap. Now with this new system, they went with the Holy Trinity. There is you can build for a tank, you can build for DPS, you can build for heals, and there's a very little bit of that because you still have to be able to solo. But when it comes to that high end content, you have to have somebody that's a dedicated tank, dedicated DPS, dedicated healers, and it follows the basic formula like you would expect. For every um, like Final Fantasy, you have to have a tank, you have to have a healer, and you get two DPS in a four-man group. And when you scale that up, it's two tanks, two healers, four DPS, et cetera, et cetera. And ESO is very much like that. And a lot of because ESO is also not you don't tab, you don't click on one character
No,
to
you've
do it.
got the
Everything, yeah, you got the icon.
reticle.
So all the heals are general AoE heals. So basically, you just have to kind of stay near your healer. Now, if your healer sucks, it's not going to make you any difference. But it's very and it is very challenging. There's a lot of high level tier raids, and I've been on a few of them. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't fun, and the content it can be punishing. And it was with a guild and with somebody that actually knew how to raid. As much as I didn't like him, he knew what he was doing, but it's still it it it's not my jam. At least in that game, it definitely was. I had more fun doing the level 50 content in the Crystal Tower in Final Fantasy last night for 3 hours straight, going through that whole storyline, than I did for 2 hours of that raid and any other raids I've done in ESO. There's something about them. They're so because of the tabbing thing, and I mean, given all raids are a little chaotic, but there's something about the way that reticle works that in Elder Scrolls, it's extra chaotic and a lot more stressful to me. And I don't mind stress and difficulty in games, but I don't want to be completely stressed out and like have no idea where you can only see so much. Your view is only so big. You can't see if your healer runs off because it followed the tank and the tank ran off, and your DPS, you're just left, dead. And that's not fun because you just couldn't see behind you or to your left or your right. That's my impression of Elder Scrolls thing. I know a lot of people love it. Of course, the people love PvP in that game, and I think those people are nuts. But it's difficult.
I'm remembering first person only in EverQuest 1 and the difficulty of if you were facing the wrong way and there was a raid shift and you didn't see it in the chat
Right.
and like you turn around and you're like, where's everybody at? Like I'm by
Yeah.
myself now and the raid's gone and it's like I
And here
thought
comes Tunar.
yeah, and I
you
thought
know.
we were taking a med break or something. Oh man,
Mm-mm.
good times. So I think we've talked a little bit about some of the negatives. What are some of the games that you think have done raid content the right way, or done a balance of content the right way to balance the, you know, raid content versus the casual content, um, versus I don't know, just kind of looking at that
Mm.
that equation. Because in modern games, I feel like we've just got this homogenized, everyone can do everything. I
Right.
don't know that any modern games have any sort of brick wall. I don't want to call it a brick wall. That's a bad analogy. I don't know that any modern games have that
Price of entry
yeah
kind of
the
a thing.
that
Yeah.
that 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 I don't know what they call it. The price of entry is good. That line that separates, the
The
hardcore from
men
the
from the
casual. Yeah, the
boys.
men from the boys. That's a very good way to put it. But yeah, I don't think modern games have that anymore. And I'm trying to think back of when was the last game that did it like that, and is that a good or a bad thing? What are you guys' thoughts on that?
So you're talking the barrier of entry problem.
Barrier of
Thank you.
entry.
That's yeah. Thank
Yeah.
you.
I hear
That
good
was
things about World of Warcraft's raids
Yeah.
that they're at least in
Yeah.
the past.
I do
I
too.
I don't again, that's World of Warcraft is one of my biggest weaknesses in MMO. It's the biggest MMO I never got into.
yeah. Same
Yeah.
here.
But I from Ericus, a guy that listens to my show who is a huge he plays World of Warcraft still and he he really likes like the raid scene and things like that. I don't he it everyone I've seen raves about it because they do get, 8, 12 bosses per raid, and their gear progression is good. And as far as I know, I'm going off of hearsay that World of Warcraft, for almost every expansion, they kind of reinvent their game in the end game a little bit, or sometimes quite a bit, so that you almost to the point. I have another friend, Bob, who is big on that, and he and my brother-in-law, who I've talked to about it, just specifically for things like this. They like the fact that the game reinvents itself every expansion and that they have to relearn and get new raid gear and do new raid mechanics, but at the same time it's also the negative of them having to relearn their favorite game every single time an expansion comes out and redo the point systems and things like that. There's definitely a give and take, and sometimes they do it really well. Like Lich King was one, and I think the one before the one that just came out, I don't like a couple years ago now.
I know a lot.
They
I heard
they
a lot of
seem to
negative things about Legion. I think was the one I heard a lot of bad things about.
Yeah, that one was it wasn't that one. It was if there's one before or whichever one was before or after that one. I can't remember. It's been a while. And I know one just dropped and that was the one everyone's bailing from and
Shadowlands,
going
I
to
think is
Final
what it's
Fantasy
called.
for.
Yeah,
Yeah. But
because
they
I
do good certain things and it's just it's a big gamble for a company to try to reinvent the combat wheel every
every
single time
time.
you release something.
Because again, the last time I rated significantly was EverQuest 2 back at circa 2009,
Mm-hmm.
which was when the Shadow Odyssey launched,
Sounds about
and
right.
we went from the very hardcore raids in the Kunark expansion to then there were raids, but it was more about these series of dungeons which were incredibly difficult, and you were going and doing like the new version of the new version of the Guck dungeons, and
Right.
it was very much geared towards unless you had mythical weapons from the raids in the previous tier, you weren't going to be able to do enough DPS to get through certain of the new dungeons, and you didn't have enough armor to get through the ninja dungeon. So it was just another tier of difficulty. But that was the last time I played EverQuest 2 religiously. But I have very fond memories of that game being like the pinnacle of raid content because it was I had fun in EverQuest 1, but it was also chaotic in the sense that there wasn't a maximum amount of players that you could take in. So it was just however many people you could get, and that was the way you won was by zerging mobs, and just there wasn't that a lot of strategy involved. It was mostly just make sure you bring enough clerics to see heal and make sure you've got enough tanks to do tank rotations, and then just pile on the DPS. As opposed to when EverQuest 2 came out, suddenly we had restrictions on how many people could go into a zone. So you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't enter like if you had more than four groups of 6 players, 24 people, you couldn't enter the zone. That was the max. You had 4 groups that you could take in. And I felt that added an element of strategy to the game that was missing in EverQuest 1 because now we had to strategize about who we brought, class makeup, also who were the most reliable people who could play those classes the best, and then just finding out who were the people who could A, handle being under pressure constantly, and B, show up reliably, because it
Right.
is it is a second job at that. If you're going to play at that tier, it is a second job. Um, it's not something that is you can't do it on 5 hours a week. That is, you're playing 3 to 5 hours every night. Like you're coming home from work and that's what you do.
Not
But
to
this
mention keeping track of
sure.
DKP and who does
But this is
this and who
also
does
pre
that.
pre Netflix, pre Hulu, pre Amazon
Hmm.
Prime, and all these other things that take up our time these days. But I have very fond memories of that time, and I feel like I enjoyed there being a barrier of entry, and I enjoyed there being some sort of line that was a line in the sand that said these are the 5 to 10% of badass players who you could look at their gear and go, man, I
Yeah.
Hmm.
wish I could be like that, but I don't have the time or whatever the case might be. But it's really cool to look at somebody. Uh, there is
I,
a
I I think of the same way as an athlete, like you were saying before.
Yeah.
You look at a guy that's all buff and jacked and he's been lifting
Stop!
and
You're embarrassing me.
well, he's got one of those. I wish I could have muscles like that, but
But I also don't want to have to
else.
work. I don't want to eat 4,000 calories a day and work out
It's
for 8
not
hours
fun.
like you
Yeah,
like yeah, The Rock or
No, I don't.
the Witcher guy.
That's. I did get a little gym crazy. Just as a side note, I got this a couple years ago now, end of 2018. I went to the doctor and she's like, "Your cholesterol's really high," and I was like, "I've never had a physical in my life." She's like, "Well, you're 39, your cholesterol is really bad." So I went to join the gym, and I did go crazy for a year, and I put on about 30 pounds of muscle, and I did the whole eat 6 meals a day, cramming
Mm,
150 grams of protein down my throat. It's not fun. Like,
well,
it's
mm-mm.
not fun to eat like that. Like, it's just not. You're eating
I'm watching
for.
it right now.
Yeah, it's just.
My my son he does baseball. He's 18 years old. He's eating 3,000 calories a day,
Yeah.
but he's built like he could be in a Marvel movie. I mean, he's 6'4".
Oh,
He's all
damn.
muscles, and I
Damn.
mean, he
That's a big boy.
but he works out, 3 hours a day practically. But I asked him the other day. I'm like, I had made dinner. All right, an hour and a half later, he comes down and he's got a stack of 5 protein waffles, and he's just, oh god,
Yeah, it
like,
sucks.
are you tired of eating it? He's like, I cannot wait till I'm done with this, and it's like he chose to do it, and he knows, he's
Yeah.
and he's getting great results. He's up several pounds, and it's all muscle. He's doing great. I'm very proud of him, but he looks miserable. I've never seen anybody so miserable eating in my life. It's awful. I feel bad for him,
It
but
takes commitment.
it works. And he's doing it. He's doing
Yeah. So,
fantastic. But
and some of that is
he's elite. He's doing
yes.
what I wish I could do and I had the willpower to do, but
Yeah.
my willpower for getting 3,000 calories a day includes going to McDonald's 4 times,
Which
which
is
is
delicious,
not
by
going
the
to
way.
get me there.
It is
hey,
delicious.
hey,
Yeah.
some people live for that stuff. So same thing with these elite raiders.
Mhm.
Some of them
And
just
that's their jam. It's like
jam.
people that go to football games and paint their faces, and they got their 6 buddies and it spells out Saints or whatever. That's what they do. And for these Raiders, that's their thing. And it's cool. I don't get it. I think they're nuts, but more power to them, man. Whether or not that content is worth the time and effort and money the developers put into it, clearly there has to be some metric that they're measuring that says, all right, we put, a 12-man team on this raid content. We keep and what does most raid content do? They reuse assets, and
Assets.
they
Add more hit
recolor it.
points. Yeah.
Yeah, they add more hit points. They take an old boss and they make him orange instead of black. I don't know, whatever the color is.
And bigger.
And bigger, because apparently EverQuest 2 is notorious for that. Well, this
The-
guy's tough. That's why he's
You got
80
the little
feet tall.
you got little cockatrice that's like this big, and
Yeah.
then you got the big one that's like 3 times
Yeah,
bigger.
and the
Yeah.
only difference is that he's 8 times bigger than the other ones. But they have to have these this metrics and the metrics and the data that shows them that I mean, it has to be worth the time and
Obviously,
effort that
it's
they're putting
financially
into it.
worth it because it keeps being
Right,
repeated.
because otherwise they wouldn't do it. I mean, if there's one thing, Final Fantasy did this thing called Knights of Vermilion. Never heard of it, have you? That's why, because it's terrible. The little minions, the pets that you have in that game, they created a game where you could basically fight them in a real-time strategy type of game setting. It's still in the game. It's terrible. It
Warcraft has
runs
that
like
too.
Yeah, it runs like garbage. It runs it like you could have the whole game could run at 120 frames a second. You plug that thing in once, it's like 5 frames a second. It's terribly designed.
I
It's
wonder if
bad.
Warcraft copied because my wife and I played retail when she attempted to play Warcraft with me for a little while a couple years back, and there is this pet thing. They're not like pet, it's like these animals, companion pet things, and it's a pet combat system. And what you do is you seek out other pets in the
Hmm.
zones, and your pet fights that pet, and your pet gets levels, and then you can capture that pet, and that pet can now be a new pet that you can use to fight other pets. And the pets
That's
have different ranks and
That
skills.
sounds more
And
like a Pokemon thing.
okay,
This
fair enough.
the Knights of Vermilion is like a they have them on like almost a soccer field, and you have like 6 versus
Oh
6,
my
and it's
god.
really a real-time strategy thing, and it runs so badly. If it was funny enough, people are like, why didn't you guys just give us Pokemon and Final Fantasy? We have all these stupid wind-up toys and pets. Just give us that. It
Just meld them.
sounds like World of Warcraft did that. I've never heard of that myself either, so they must not have done it very well.
Yeah, I don't know
But
what it's called.
yeah.
It was like a mini game within the game that you could
Hmm.
do, and it didn't contribute to your levels or anything like that. It was just this complete side thing
Yeah,
that
and
you could do. So
that's what the Vermilion thing was. It ran so poorly. I thought it was going to be cool when I found it. I'm like, oh yeah, there's a reason. There's only 2 people in the top 20 list of players.
well, I'll be interested to see because it sounds to me like Crowfall is doing a very standard um, in-game system where it's just you get to the end game and it's just PvP, which that's been done
Yeah,
in lots of other games before. And from what I understand of New World that's coming out just in a couple months here, that's also very standard in the sense that it's all about level up, get to the
Level up.
end,
PvP.
and then PvP. So
Right.
Yeah,
I'm interested to see if there are going to be any games that challenge that diagram in the coming years and push beyond the vertical progression and give us more horizontal. But it obviously is risky. We understand that the
hmm,
financial benefits of creating a vertical game like that work. So that's what everybody does because it does give you it gives the players a reason to go from
yeah.
point A to point B. So I
Right.
guess we'll see where it goes. So any closing thoughts from you guys on any of these things?
No, I mean, I think we went over quite extensively. I think uh, I think Pantheons might have some progressions ideas.
Pantheon. Yeah,
Might some have some vertical progression ideas.
From what I understand, they're definitely building more of a Vanguard style game, which if it pans out, I'm going to be very pleased with that because Vanguard was very much a horizontal game. It did have a vertical progression to it, but there was so
yeah.
much horizontal and it was so big that you had a lot you could do. So, I'm also hesitant because of how long it's taken them and everything else. But I look at them the same way I look at Star Citizen. It's like I don't doubt that the game's going to come out. It's just I'm not going to hold
I'm
my
really looking
breath.
forward to 2035 when it finally releases.
Yes, yes. I'm not holding my breath. Whenever it comes out, I will then go spend the money to get my HOTAS set up and
Stop adding features. Just release the damn game.
yes. So it'll be interesting.
But no, I think the my final thought is that this whole point this is completely pointless because the real end game is all about clothing.
I agree.
That's all it's
Cosmetics.
about.
That's all I give a shit
Cosmetics are
about.
where it's at. You can rate all you want, but we all know why you're doing it. You're doing all that hard work not for the stats,
It's for
but
these
because
cool
it looks
hats.
cool
Cool
and it's
hats
sparkly. Yeah,
and my
and
beard
it's glitter
braids and
effects. Yeah, that's right. That's all it's for.
my earrings. And
No, I've covered pretty much
I
everything
did
as far as I
literally
could think too.
when I went and decided to start using earrings again about 3 months ago. I haven't used earrings since I was 22 and I'm 41 now. I went and bought. I'm not gonna lie. I bought 6 sets of earrings because I went on Amazon and I was like,
Nah.
I had a bunch of cash back rewards from my credit card, and I was like, oh, I've got $250 I could blow, and I'm like, I like that, and I just ordered like 6 sets of earrings, and I've literally got them all in the bathroom, and I only wear the one. But it was like it's a cosmetic thing. It's like I'm gonna
Hmm.
just buy all these things because I
But
want to
what
look
if I
cool.
do want to wear
Right.
one?
It's like I want this for the time when I'm gonna wear this shirt and I'm gonna use this
Yeah,
when I wear this outfit. So yeah, cosmetics is where it's at.
that's right.
Um, where can we find you guys when you're not here?
You can find me at Defend the Night. Uh, well, www.defendthenightgame.com, and at Defend the Night on Twitter.
Um, for me, it's twitch.tv/crashed while loading, or you could just, I'm also on YouTube, but you have to just search crashed while loading because I'm not important enough to get a youtube.com/ yet.
Takes a
It's
bit
just a
these
jumble of
days.
numbers and letters, and I'm not
Right.
saying that.
2251 CCPPYY.
CZ, yep, // HTTP colon, I'm not doing any of that.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, you can find their links below as well. I'll have links dropped in the description text for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to get updates for future content, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. We will see everybody next time, and don't forget to obviously check out all the previous episodes in the playlist. Adios.
Adios, amigo.
Later.